Hello and welcome to this evening's program. I am Denise Lawrence and I have been a student and teacher with the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University for more than 45 years. So I had a good opportunity to learn many deep and important aspects about spirituality and bringing spiritual principles into regular everyday life. Today I'm going to be talking about love and detachment. Detachment as an act of love. This might seem contradictory because many people feel that love is everything to do with attachment and involvement. But then comes the other side where there's disappointment, disillusionment, and all of that. So sometimes people have rather an ambivalent relationship with both love and detachment. But in spirituality, we look at it a little differently. Love is a quality of the soul, one of the essential, original qualities of the soul. And it is expressed by doing actions and giving feelings and vibrations that are beneficial and sustaining to those that you direct your love to. Usually in the world we live in, we think of love as something that we receive and a feeling that we get from someone, from what they do and how they treat us and so on. And that is definitely there. So in spirituality, we talk about the karma or the interaction between individuals. And we think of individuals as fundamentally spiritual beings, beings of light or souls, who interact with each other through the medium of the physical body and in different circumstances. So an act of love would be an act which is beneficial to someone. But sometimes there are situations, not just sometimes, quite a lot of the time, there are situations where someone desires something and they say to you, well, if you love me, then you will do this and you will do that and you will not do this and you will not do that. But it happens quite often that a person's desire for love is a form of dependency, and in many ways it is an energy that likes to entrap the other person, and we need to understand about these things. So you have inside your being, inside your soul, conscience. And conscience is usually thought of as something that you use to decide whether you're doing a right action or a wrong action. And if you do a wrong action, then your conscience will bite you, and the memory of that wrong action will sit on your conscience, and you will feel bad about yourself. You may feel a guilty conscience. We use this expression. But conscience has another function, and it also can let you know if what someone wants from you is correct, reasonable, appropriate, karmically accurate. Your conscience can also tell you that whether a person's moral reasoning is accurate or not. For example, if they say to you, if you love me, then you will do this, this, this. But maybe that would not be an act of love. So your conscience will tell you, no, this is not what I need to be doing for this person, but the person will get angry. And this anger, this emotion that a person feels when you don't do what they want is directed at you to try to make you do what they want and fulfill their desire in the name of love. But this is where we need powers. And when we practice spirituality and we study about these things, we also gradually develop what we call spiritual powers. And one of the very helpful spiritual powers is called the power of discernment, or the power to discriminate or discern exactly what's behind what a person is saying. And if they say, if you love me, you will do this and this and fulfill my desire, your conscience will let you know that there's something wrong with that statement, something wrong with the moral logic in there, and you will discern that what's really going on is they want to promote an enmeshment, an entrapment, and get you caught up in doing what they want, and then you lose your freedom. And that becomes not a very good relationship. It can be a dysfunctional relationship or a toxic relationship. And so spirituality will say, at such a moment, you need to step back and take a look at the situation with a wider perspective and say no. You may say no directly, and that may create a very strong reaction, or you may say no in a more indirect way. But whatever is the way that you do it, you need to set limits and boundaries. And these limits and boundaries are very important in order to maintain good quality relationships. According to spiritual philosophy or the spiritual knowledge, the spiritual wisdom, relationship is something that must be conducted correctly. And the give and take has to be equal. When the balance of give and take becomes unequal, then the relationship becomes incorrect and it creates karmic bondage, karmic obligation. And whenever there is a situation like that, and the relationship has gone out of balance, then there is suffering. Emotional suffering, could be social, financial, all sorts of suffering can happen when the relationship is skewed and out of balance. So in that case, one needs to really sit down with the other person and negotiate what's okay and what's not okay. And this is really a lot of work. And it's a very delicate matter because very often it will provoke quite strong emotions, and you may have to go through a crisis in the relationship. So in that case, you have to decide, is this relationship so important to you that you really want to invest the time, the energy, and the work to work out the contract, you can say the social contract of the relationship. And this has to do with your personal spiritual criteria of what is important to you. So you have a relationship with another person because you wish to enjoy a life of interaction, close interaction with people. There's a great deal of fulfillment that comes in a meaningful, long-term relationship. But for that, there has to be a balance of love and detachment. So for many, the idea of a balance of love and detachment can be scary because they really think that the relationship is to fulfill their needs. And the relationship can fulfill your needs to some extent. It depends upon the relationship. And there are spiritual laws connected with relationships, like family relationships, friendships, and so on. For example, if you have a child, then you have an obligation to fulfill that child's needs, but there comes a time when the desire of the child is not in accordance with what the child needs. And then in that case, there has to be a step of detachment, and you will say to your child, I'm here for you, but I'm not going to do what you want, because what you want is actually negative, and I'm not going to support your negative desires because I love you. This is a very good indicator where an act of detachment is felt by the other one to be a lack of love. And it may provoke a strong reaction, maybe in some cases a temper tantrum, but you have to hold your ground and not get swayed by the emotional manipulation that the other person wishes to apply on you. And if you are in an enmeshed relationship with that person, then it becomes very difficult for you to take a step back. And enmeshment is another word for attachment. So when you are enmeshed with another person, you are emotionally dependent on that other person, you are using that other person to fulfill your emotional needs in an inappropriate way, then it starts to cause you to do inaccurate karma or negative karma. And whenever there is negative karma going on in a relationship, the result of that is suffering. And so you get many situations where people are in very strong relationships of love-hate. You can't be with that person, you can't be without that person. You want that person to interact with you in a certain way, but they cannot do that because they feel that you are maybe desiring to pull their energy, you are being a predator in terms of their energy, you are limiting them in an inappropriate way, and they will say, I cannot continue with this relationship because the way in which the relationship is being conducted has become toxic. There are relationships of love and detachment with friends. And the relationship of a friend is different, or the relationship of a sibling is different. These are quite equitable relationships. And in terms of spiritual law, what you are obliged to provide in terms of your love in a relationship with a friend or a sibling is love and regard. But you do not have to do more than that. In spirituality, we talk about the relationship of spiritual brotherhood. In terms of thinking of the self as a soul, all souls are called brothers. Brothers means beings who are genderless, who are without any body color because the color is on the body, without culture, without religion, as like pure spiritual being of light, whose fundamental characteristics are purity, peace, power, love, bliss. And when you enter into an equal relationship with another human brother, another spiritual being, then the foundation contract is love and regard. And in fact, the more you develop yourself spiritually, the more you like the idea of making your relationships with people fundamentally like this, where there is no bondage, where there is no attachment. It is very pure love, and you enter into a deep relationship with a person in such a way that you do not use them, you do not let them use you. You come together because you have a common purpose, or you feel many different kinds of affinities. And the relationship progresses according to many different situations and criteria. But it's very important for a human being to have at least a few people in their life who is a significant person. Sometimes people use the expression soulmate for each other. A soulmate is somebody that you feel you know them. Maybe you feel you've had many lives together, so you know them just intuitively, you recognize them. And there are many karmic strands between you, but these are not karmic bondages, but what we use the expression relationships of harmony, karma samband, as opposed to a relationship of bondage where it involves settlement of karmic debt. So where you have a relationship where you're very careful not to come into debt, you're always attentive that the relationship is equitable, the give and take is equal, you keep everything in good equilibrium, then you can have a deep, meaningful, important relationship where you can count on that person for things you should be able to count on them for, and that they will not deceive you or betray you. There is trust. You honor each other's freedom. You honor maybe differences of opinion, because not everybody needs to agree on everything in order to have a very deep and meaningful relationship. Of course, there are very few people like this in your life, and it takes a lot of time to build such a relationship. And in fact, in any relationship, there are always going to be moments of crisis where the relationship could break down completely. But if that relationship is important to you, then you will go through the crisis, you will work through it, you will represent yourself very fully and clearly, This is what I stand for, this is what I will do, this is what I won't do. These are my principles. There may be something that happened in the relationship which violates your principles, and you will say, no, we cannot relate like this as long as there's a violation of my principles. I do not accept that. And so you have to go through. And in many cases, you will find that the problem in the relationship can be because of a misunderstanding. That happens very easily. It can also be because you have an expectation of the other person, and you need to recognize that you shouldn't be having that expectation because you are crossing over a certain line. So these lines or these limits and boundaries in relationships are very important to make sure that they are renegotiated whenever a situation changes, because situations do change. When you have a lifelong relationship with someone, circumstances change, you're aging, you may move geographically, you may have illness, you may pass through some other situation in another relationship which impinges on this relationship. So there are many, many things that happen in life which change the situation. Then we have to sit down and renegotiate the relationship and make clear what is the foundation of our give and take of love. And only when there is detachment is it possible to actually face the reality of a critical moment in a relationship. Let us take a look for a moment at love and detachment in professional relationships. Nowadays, with the COVID-19 restrictions, many people are having to work at home. Many people are having to wear masks when they are at the workplace. There's a lot more stress because of the pandemic, and there are many businesses that have closed. Many people have lost their jobs. There are all kinds of new situations that have created a lot of strain, tension, and stress in terms of one's work life and one's work relationships. I think there's also a lot of panic in people. There are people who catch the virus and then they get through it. They have a mild impact. Some people, they have a little bit severe impact, but they get through it anyway. But whenever someone comes down with the virus, then it creates stress in the relationships. People are afraid, and there's a lot of material in the media which makes people overreact, and sometimes it causes us to relate improperly towards people who have the virus because of this overreaction. So there are important practices that we need to fulfill if we are interacting with people who are in quarantine or who have the symptoms of the virus, and we need to show our love, we need to give help, we need to give assistance where needed. And we also have to keep a certain detachment. We have to make sure that we wear personal protective clothing and masks and gloves and whatever is appropriate in the situation. But in that, we also need to understand that the kind of isolation that people are subjected to is something they're not used to. So one thing that I do is to have conversations with people in my contact through my work who are in quarantine or who have symptoms, because we can do this through the social media. And it's just very important to give time to people and to listen to them, to have social contact with people, because there is quite a big impact on people's mental health when they are in forced isolation. So even if we cannot be physically near each other, to use the social media, video, teleconferencing and so on, to spend time with people is just very, very helpful and a very good sign of love. And again, in all of these situations, we need to consult the conscience. The more a person spends time in meditation and spiritual study, the more your conscience gets refined, and you get a very good sense of what is enough, what is not enough, what is too much, what is the right thing to do, when and for how long, and when somebody is experiencing difficulties, to what extent is it reasonable, to what extent is it because they are emotionally disturbed and they are being demanding more than is appropriate. So these are very fine nuances that very often people get confused about. And I think that the practice of detachment allows a person to step back and really look at the situation as it really is and decide, okay, this is what I will do and this is what I can do. And it's also very important to tell the person that, okay, within these situations I have various other commitments and so on, and I can be there for you to this extent, and do not feel that I don't love you, I don't care about you, no, but I have many things I have to juggle, and are you okay with this? You see, so again and again in good quality relationships we have to sit down with the person and discuss with them. Sometimes it happens that there's just such a degree of misunderstanding, and the two parties are coming from such very different places that there is no point of common understanding. And that can happen, especially if a person is panicked, or if they're very distressed, or they become mentally unstable, emotionally unstable. Then at such a time you have to be quite firm about what your position is, and also be detached from their reaction. If you know, by consulting your conscience, by going deep inside, if you know that what you're doing is a right action, even if another person doesn't like it, but it is a right action, then you have to do it and be detached from the reaction of others. The problem with doing the right thing, doing the right action, is that people have many different criteria for that. And the prevailing social attitudes that we live in are quite often, from a spiritual angle, quite wrong, but they don't know. And so they think something is right, but you know, because you've studied it, that it isn't right. then they will have a very strong reaction because you are challenging the foundation of their moral system. And every so often that does come up. And then when that happens, you may need to just step back from each other because you're operating from very, very different criteria. I think if the relationship is important enough, you will go through that crisis and you will work out a compromise, you will negotiate it, and then you will be able to move forward. But in many, many cases, this doesn't happen. And this is because people's moral principles are based on erroneous criteria. The if-then is out of order. And so then it becomes a matter of deep study of moral philosophy. And most people are not able to do that, not willing to do that, not interested in doing that. And they feel it's my way or the highway, a lot of people. And in that case, the relationship may fall away. This also happens very much in the professional arena because you may say, okay, I have certain rights as an employee, I have my limits, I will work to this extent, I have to keep my life in balance, and you understand what the contract is, but maybe the employer wants more, maybe they bully you, and maybe they blackmail you, and they say, well, if you don't do what I want, then you're fired, and you can't afford to be fired, so then you allow yourself to get into a very abusive situation. There are many, many people in this situation because employers take advantage of the fact that people are dependent on their job. And then you get a very difficult situation because you cannot afford to stand up for your rights. And this is why there is the question of trade unions and so on. But I think to a large extent, in the circumstances of the COVID rules and regulations where people are working from home, they're diminished in their ability to stand up for their rights. And in that case, the employer is picking up a lot of negative karma. But what should you do as a person who is in an abusive situation in the professional arena and you can't afford financially to take care of the situation? One of the things that can be helpful is to be emotionally very stable, because the situation which gives you stress and pressure can definitely provoke an emotional reaction. And when you try to represent yourself with emotion, then the other party can take advantage of that and put you in a very difficult situation. So this is why a spiritual practice is very helpful to enable us to manage our, what we call our stage, our internal stage, to be emotionally neutral about situations that are highly charged and that would normally provoke strong emotional reaction. So we need to think about how to bring into our regular life some elements of spiritual practice that are going to shift our situation from being relatively vulnerable to abusive people to much less vulnerable or more invulnerable And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the practice of meditation in this regard. One thing that's very important in spiritual practice is to think about your identity. And we call this the development of soul consciousness or spiritual consciousness. In terms of the world, people believe that they need to develop loving relationships, and then they call themselves, I am this one's wife, this one's husband, this one's sister, this one's brother, this one's friend, therefore they have to do this and they have to do that. And it creates an emotional dependence on the basis of your sense of identity. But in spiritual practice, there is this thought that I am me. I don't belong to anyone. No one belongs to me. So I don't use these therefore anymore. So I am me. My identity is that I am a non-dependent person on people, places, and things. That's easier said than done, but it is the foundation of a spiritual practice. We are there in interaction with people. We are there in many situations where there are expectations, agreements, and so on. Sometimes we make agreements that are not good agreements, and then we have to sort those out. But going deep inside the self and affirming to the self that I am me, and I am not dependent on any people, any places, or any things for my sense of identity. This gives you the possibility to step back, and when people start to use statements that are designed to trap you, it becomes much easier for you to say to yourself, you don't necessarily have to say to the other person, but the other person will say, you are my this and therefore that. And you will say to yourself, that's a role that I play, no doubt. And I'm playing my role accurately, according to my understanding of my obligations and duties. And I do not accept to be pulled into feeling that I have to do something that I don't have to do, or that I have to be something for someone that actually I don't have to be. And it takes quite a lot of inner work to be very clear about this part, because the others will use the moral reasoning of the prevailing social attitudes. And you will use moral reasoning that comes from a deeper study of the laws of spirituality, which are really very different. So you keep yourself detached from the story, which means that all of the ploys that people may use to try to get you to feel bad about yourself don't actually work, and that they are not able to manipulate you into doing something that is actually against your principles, and you won't do it. And if they get upset about it, it doesn't trouble you, because you know deep down that they are trying to do something which they should not be trying to do, and that you do not buy into that game. You do not allow yourself to be manipulated. And it may cost you, they may do a few things to punish you, to deprive you of one thing or another. But you have other spiritual powers. You can accommodate that behavior. You can endure, you can tolerate when people try to harm you, and you get through it. But you get through it with your sense of identity intact and with your integrity intact. And this is a very important thing. The world at the moment is a place of mostly quite toxic relationships, quite dysfunctional relationships, whether in the family or in the workplace or in the community. There's a lot of conflict going on. People use and abuse each other for their personal gratification. And so it's not an easy world to live in. But what happens when you study and practice spirituality is you are connected with a higher power, a higher source. And that higher source is outside the range of most people, actually. This is the pure being of the Supreme Soul, the Supreme Spirit. And this is really your source. You need love. You need strength. You need peace. And you need access to a source of wisdom that will confirm and verify for you and guide you as you try to negotiate some quite difficult circumstances, especially in terms of relationship. And for this, we need to develop our meditation. So let me invite you to join with me for some meditation, which means deep thought about what it means to be you in relationship with a higher being who is not part of the human world of interactions where there are lots of problems, but this is another kind of relationship, a relationship with the source of light. And when you go deep inside, connect with yourself as a light, as a spirit, you can feel it. And there you're really taking a step back from the world of sense perception, the world of people, places and things. You see it like a gigantic three-dimensional film. And when you want, you can just step out and step into another dimension, the inner world. It's a dimension of light. Feel yourself to be a being of light. You are not your body. You are not your relationships. No one really has any power over you. As you go deep inside, you feel your own peace. You feel your inner strength. You turn your attention to the supreme light, whose presence you feel in this dimension of light beyond. It becomes very real, more stable, and more solid than the happenings in the world of people, places and things, the movie. You connect with that one in your heart, in your mind. You're focused on that light. You make contact. And you can feel the energy of the Spirit reaching you. Vibrations of peace and purity soothe your being. That strength, that energy fills your soul. You become deeply quiet. That light streams into you. And it spreads through you and beyond you. Filling the atmosphere of clarity and sweetness. Chaotic vibrations become calm and focused. Your mind is clear. You are in your power. And you step into situations with clarity and confidence. And gently let yourself step back in to the world of people, places and things. But at the same time, you have your connection to the one beyond. You step into situations in the sense of who you really are. You do not get pulled in, enmeshed or destabilized. you feel that it's good to be you. So this is a few thoughts about practicing this balance, this equilibrium of detachment and love. There are many ways in which you can apply this. So you can try this out in your family, with your friendships, at work. Experiment with these ideas and find your own place with them. And as you move forward with this, you become more expert in maintaining the balance and applying the balance in different situations. Even in your relationship with yourself, because now that we have more quiet time, I think, more time alone than before, then you have to deal with yourself. And it's almost as if there are two people. There's you and yourself. And you have to deal with the different emotions that come up and clarify for yourself that just because you have a strong feeling about something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's real. Check with yourself and do not get carried away by strong feelings, because sometimes we have to be even detached from the feelings that we feel inside. Everyone is doing their inner work, and I think nowadays, because there's more time where we are thrown back upon ourselves, then we really do have to face a lot of internal music, and we have to come to terms with ourselves and who we are and our limitations and move forward, and that is okay. So I wish you a very good rest of the day, and hope that you enjoy your role in this great, enormous drama of life in the world. And thank you very much for your kind attention. Om Shanti.